I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you decide to take a road trip back.
Okay, I'm picked.
Right. So you're driving down these familiar streets, making all the familiar turns, and you're heading toward your favorite childhood home.
Oh, the nostalgia hit.
Exactly. This is the place where you have all your fondest, most vivid memories, the place that practically shaped who you are. But when you finally turn onto the street and pull up to the curb, you just slam on the brakes.
Because it's gone.
The original house has been completely bulldozed, and in its place, someone has built a replica.
Oh, wow, a replica.
Yeah, a replica. Now, from the street, at first glance, it looks like almost exactly the same. The wraparound porch is there, the roof line is pitched at the identical angle, the windows are in the exact same spots.
But there's a catch.
Always a catch. As you get out of the car and walk up the driveway, your brain just starts sounding these massive alarm bells. You realize the paint is just the slightly wrong shade of color. The front door, which used to be this heavy oak, is clearly made of some cheaper composite material.
Right, it's like a knockoff.
Exactly. The texture of the bruck is too smooth. The whole thing just feels entirely off. You are standing in a place you know, but you feel like...
That is honestly the most perfect analogy for what we're jumping into today.
I thought so too. So welcome to the deep dive. We are so thrilled you're here with us today. Because if you are the kind of curious mind who wants to understand the cultural mechanics behind internet outrage and, the powerful grip of nostalgia...
Almost dangerous grip, really.
Truly dangerous. And what happens when those two volatile things collide head-on with modern Hollywood economics, well, you are in exactly the right place.
Yeah, because we're looking at a situation where the architecture is familiar, but the soul feels totally fabricated.
That's the mission for today. We are going to dissect the absolute lightning rod of a reaction to the very first trailer for HBO's brand new Harry Potter reboot.
Which is just, it's wild because today, we aren't just talking about a new TV show dropping on a streaming service. We are looking at the intersection of a multi-billion-dollar IP, a really deeply entrenched fandom, and a corporate machine trying to manufacture a safe hit.
In an era where safe hits don't really exist anymore. To do this, we are pulling from an incredibly comprehensive breakdown done by a pop culture and commentary channel called Clownfish TV.
Yeah, and their analysis is incredibly valuable.
It really is. It isn't just that they review the footage, right? They actually managed to capture and catalog this incredibly wide, chaotic spectrum of fan reactions, industry rumors, aesthetic critique, all of it.
And the financial anxieties, too.
Oh, yeah. Those underlying financial anxieties that just flooded the internet the second this trailer dropped.
When you look at the landscape Clownfish TV paint, there is this massive, almost tectonic tension happening.
Yeah.
On one side, you have a legacy studio that is economically desperate to revitalize one of the most lucrative IPs in human history.
And on the other side,
you have a fan base that feels entirely alien. They are looking at this trailer and literally calling it repackaged slop.
Repackaged slop. The language being thrown around online is so visceral. People aren't just saying they dislike it, they feel insulted by it.
Which is what?
Right. Which is why, before we get into the corporate motivations or the logistics of like a decade-long production, we have to start with the surface level. We have to look at what you, the viewer, actually see when you hit play on this trailer.
The visual.
Yes, the visual critique out there is absolutely brutal. One of the most prominent internet verdicts gaining traction, according to the source, calling this a Temu version of Harry Potter.
That specific insult, calling something the Temu version, it's such a fascinating piece of modern cultural shorthand.
It really is. What does that actually imply?
Well, Temu, as a marketplace, it implies a direct-to-consumer knockoff.
Right.
It implies something that uses the exact same marketing photos as a premium product, but when it actually arrives in your mailbox, the fabric is paper thin.
The stitching is falling apart.
Exactly. So by applying that label to an HBO production, the audience is diagnosing a really severe lack of craftsmanship.
And they're bringing receipts to back up that diagnosis. Fans in the Clownfish TV breakdown are pointing out very specific visual downgrades. A massive focal point is the lighting.
Lighting is always a giveaway.
Right. People are meticulously comparing the new footage to the original movies, which, keep in mind, started coming out 25 years ago.
Hard to believe it's been that long.
I know, makes you feel old. But they're describing the new look as incredibly muddy.
Which points to a much larger shift in how Hollywood approaches cinematography, right? If you go back to Chris Columbus's work on The Sorcerer's Stone in 2001, you're looking at actual film stock.
Oh, sure.
You're looking at massive practical sets lit by incredibly warm, intentional lighting to make the Great Hall feel magical and inviting. But modern streaming productions, conversely, they rely heavily on digital sensors, high contrast, and often desaturated color grading.
So it's a completely different technological approach.
Yeah, they're shooting for high-definition screens, which paradoxically often results in a flatter, darker, less textured image. So the muddiness the fans are reacting to, it's really just the visual signature of the modern streaming era being forcefully overlaid onto a world they remember as warm and tactile.
Wow. Okay. And that tactile nature brings up another massive complaint tracked by Clownfish. The sets themselves.
Oh, this is a big one.
Right. Viewers are pausing the trailer and realizing that it looks like the production is using the exact same physical Hogwarts sets, or at least the identical architectural blueprints.
Which feels lazy to the fans.
Yeah, and the immediate speculation driving the comment sections is that this is a corporate synergy mandate tied to the real-world theme parks. The theory is that Universal and Warner Brothers have already spent billions building the Wizarding World theme parks to match the movie. So the new television show is financially locked into reusing that exact same aesthetic, so the real-world branding remains.
I mean, it makes complete business sense.
Does it?
Well, yeah. You can't have a new generation of kids fall in love with a completely redesigned, radically different Hogwarts on television, only to beg their parents to take them to a theme park that looks like a retro homage to a completely different era of the franchise.
Okay, yeah, when you put it that way, the physical theme park essentially dictates the digital production.
Exactly. But that business logic creates a really severe artistic constraint, which leads directly to, I think, the most profound critique in the Clownfish TV break.
The AI comparison?
Yes, the comparison to artificial intelligence.
This was everywhere in the source material, the AI slop comparison.
And it isn't just a throwaway insult. It is a highly specific aesthetic observation. The consensus among the fandom is that the visuals just don't look like a human director made creative.
They say it looks like an executive went to an AI generator like Google Gemini, typed in wizard in black robes at Magic Castle, and just rendered out the first algorithmic result.
I want to dig into why it feels algorithmic, because the breakdown highlights this idea that the show looks like it's exactly 25% different from the original movies.
25%, that is such a specific number.
Right. It's this incredibly cynical sweet spot. It is just different enough to establish a new copyright, to avoid paying royalties to the original production designers, or to avoid lawsuits from the original actors.
Okay.
But it is not different enough to represent a genuinely fresh artistic vision.
So it occupies this uncanny valley of nostalgia.
Precisely. When something is 100% different, you evaluate it on its own merit. When something is a one-to-one replica, you evaluate the accuracy of the reproduction. But when something is 75% identical and 25% legally distinct, the human brain rejects it.
It doesn't feel like a new artist's interpretation of a text. It feels like an algorithm trying to avoid a plagiarism filter.
That's exactly how it feels.
I hear that, but I have to push back a little on this idea that looking the same is inherently a failure.
Okay, go for it.
Let's look at another massive Warner Brothers prop.
Sure.
When a studio reboots Batman, the lead actor changes, the director changes. The tone might shift from campy to grimdark. But fundamentally, you still need the brainy ear.
Right.
You still need the scalped cape, the Batmobile, the brooding skyline of Gotham. If you are adapting a book about a sprawling, magical Scottish castle, it's inherently going to look like a sprawling, magical Scottish castle. So is the real problem that the new Hogwarts looks the same? Or is the problem that it just looks incredibly...
Your Batman comparison is entirely valid, but it highlights a crucial difference in the legacy of these properties.
What do you mean?
Well, the visual language of Batman has been radically reinterpreted for nearly a century across comics, animation, and film. Audiences have been trained to accept Adam West's colorful camp, Tim Burton's gothic expressionism, and Christopher Nolan's grounded militarism.
So we expect reinvention with Batman?
We do. We expect reinvention. But for an entire generation, the visual language of Hogwarts has only ever been one thing: the specific, monolithic production design of those 8 original films. That is the definitive text in the public consciousness.
Right. There's no precedent for a visual.
Exactly. So when you present something that heavily mimics that definitive text, but lacks the original budget, craftsmanship, or iconic faces, it triggers that knockoff response. As one commenter highlighted in the breakdown put it, it doesn't look like a new cinematic vision. It looks like a promotional trailer for a mobile video game that couldn't secure the likeness rights of Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson.
Ouch. That is hard. But if they are terrified of changing the visuals too much, you would think they would be absolutely religious about the story to compensate.
You'd think so.
They would lean into the tech. And that brings up a really fascinating contradiction in how they're handling the timeline of this reboot and what book accurate actually means to a multi-million-dollar franchise.
The timeline is perhaps the most interesting narrative pivot there.
And it was actually one of the few surprising positives that emerged from the initial wave of reactions tracked by Clownfish TV. If you think back to the original films directed by Chris Columbus and Alfonso Cuarón, the kids were running around in relatively modern clothes.
Yeah, jeans and hoodies.
They were watching modern CRT television. The movies essentially ignored the fact that the books explicitly start in the year 1991. But in this new trailer, Hardcore fans immediately spotted that the kid playing Harry is actually dressed accurately for the early 90s.
It is a remarkable olive brand to the most dedicated segment of the fandom.
It really is. It shows they are paying attention. The breakdown also mentions highly specific, mundane book details that fans have spent 2 decades begging.
Like what?
For instance, there is footage implying they are including the scene where Aunt Petunia forcibly cuts Harry's hair, only for it to magically grow back overnight.
Oh, wow. That is a deep cut.
A very deep cut. So on one hand, the marketing is making this massive promise, right? Like, we are finally giving you the pure, unadulterated 1991 book-accurate adaptation that the movies gloss.
But that promise immediately collides with the realities of modern television production. It creates this massive cognitive dissonance for the audience.
Oh, so?
Because while the studio is loudly pitching this as a purist, chapter-by-chapter adaptation, the industry reporting indicates that the writer's room is already discussing adding entirely new scenes, backstories, and character arcs that were never in the original text.
Which completely shatters the illusion of a purist adaptation.
You cannot have it both ways. You are simultaneously claiming extreme pedantic fidelity to the text down to the exact year of the wardrobe and the haircut, while explicitly expanding the narrative beyond the boundaries of the source material.
It creates a deeply confusing proposition for her.
It really does.
Yeah.
Are we watching an expensive visual audiobook, or are we watching a modern showrunner's fan fiction set in 1991?
That identity crisis leads directly to a sentiment expressed on that I found incredibly striking in this. A fan commented that watching this trailer feels like one of those parallel universes where everything is the same but slightly off.
That phrase, parallel universe, is incredibly telling regarding how modern audiences consume pop culture.
Because of the whole multiverse trend.
Yes, we are currently living deep in the era of multiverse storytelling. The industry has trained audiences to expect this. Look at the massive success of Spider-Man: No Way Home, or the recent Deadpool movie.
Where they bring everyone back.
Exactly. Studios take different variations of the same character from different cinematic timelines and smash them together.
It's risk mitigation. You get to introduce a cheaper, newer actor while using the legacy actor as a safety net to guarantee box office.
Precise. And because of that prevailing trend, the Clownfish TD breakdown points out a natural, cynical question brewing in the fandom. Is this HBO reboot essentially functioning as the foundation for a multiverse Harry Potter?
Oh, man. So the audience is already bracing for the inevitable moment, a decade from now, where the new young cast crosses paths with the original actors through some convoluted time-turner parallel universe plot device.
Exactly. It is the multiverse syndrome.
Hollywood can't just tell a linear story with a beginning, middle, and end anymore. Everything has to exist as a node in an endlessly expanding web of alternate reality. But managing a multiverse of aging actors and new kids requires something the modern streaming industry has completely forgotten how to do.
Sticking to a schedule.
Yes, sticking to a schedule. While the timeline of the fiction might be strictly locked to 1991, the physical, real-world timeline of this production is shaping up to be a logistical nightmare.
This is where the conversation shifts from the aesthetic critiques on the screen to the harsh, unforgiving reality of the Hollywood production machine.
Right.
The stated public goal for this project is monumentally ambitious. 7 massive books adapted into 7 complete, high-budget television seasons.
Which, if everything goes perfectly, and it never does, is a full decade of continuous production, 10 years minimum. The breakdown brings up some incredibly practical and honestly humorous concerns about time.
Like the casting logistics.
Yeah, people are out there asking, how long is someone like John Lithgow going to be available to commit to this? And more pressing than the older actors, what about the children?
The kids are the biggest variable.
How old are these kids going to be by the time the final season wraps up? We've seen with other streaming hits that kids age out of their roles incredibly fast when there are massive gaps between.
The logistics of keeping a child cast together for a decade without massive continuity issues is daunting. But the breakdown highlights a much deeper systemic issue within the industry itself.
The retired producer quote.
Yes, they reference a crucial piece of insight from a retired Hollywood producer regarding this exact 10-year plan. When this veteran producer was asked if the modern industry could successfully adapt the entire book series in under 10 years,
which, we have to remember, is exactly what the original Warner Brothers film franchise managed.
Exactly. When asked if they could do it again, the producer's answer was a flat, unambiguous.
We can't. We don't know how.
We don't know how. I cannot overstate how chilling that quote should be to any studio executive banking their quarterly earnings on this show. They literally do not know how to make TV efficiently.
It is an admission of a profound loss of institutional ability. The analysis delves into how the television industry has systematically lost the art of pacing productions efficiently.
It's crazy when you think about it.
They draw a very sharp contrast with the early days of HBO's Throne. A little over a decade decade ago, that network was able to mobilize massive international crews, design intricate costumes, manage sprawling VFX pipe, and crank out a 10-episode, effects-heavy season every single year like clockwork.
And today, you wait 2 or 3 years for an 8-episode season of a flagship show. Exactly. The budgets have ballooned so drastically, the post-production visual effects pipelines are so bottlenecked, and the executive decision-making processes have become so bloated that a yearly release schedule for a show of this scale is now considered virtually impossible without going massively over budget.
So if they literally lack the institutional muscle memory to make an efficient TV show anymore, does this entire decade-long project just collapse under its own weight before they even reach the goblet of fire?
It's a very real possibility.
If the financial strain of the schedule is that severe, the studio is going to have to find cost-cutting measures somewhere. And the breakdown suggests, rather grimly, that leveraging generative AI might not just be a stylistic choice, but the only viable financial way the studio could possibly deliver 10 years of content under budget.
Which creates a devastating self-fulfilling prophecy.
How so?
If the studio cannot afford to build the massive physical sets, pay for location shoots, and schedule the enormous human crews required year after year, they will inevitably lean on digital environments and AI-assisted shortcuts.
But doing so will only further degrade the aesthetic quality.
Exactly. Cementing the exact AI slop complaints the fans are already weaponizing against the trailer. It is a vicious cycle.
It is a financial and logistical trap. Yeah. But if the schedule is a looming slow-motion disaster, there is a much more immediate hurdle they have to clear right now, on day one. And that is the challenge of convincing an audience to accept entirely new faces and voice in some of the most deeply iconic roles in modern pop culture.
Casting.
The cast. This brings us to the human element dive. The fandom fractures, the recasting shock, and the massive shadow of controversy that is hanging over every single frame production.
The recasting shock cannot be understated. When a character is embodied by a specific actor for a decade, their performance becomes the definitive canon in the audience's mind. The Clownfish TV breakdown highlights just how jarring both the visual and the auditory changes are for this deeply entrenched fan base.
The auditory shock is such a brilliant point from the source material. The way a character sounds is often more memorable than how they look. There's a great example in the breakdown regarding the character of Hagrid.
Oh, Robbie Coltrane.
Yes, Robbie Coltrane's performance, specifically his booming West Country accent, is permanently etched into the millennial brain. Fans watching the new trailer are saying that hearing a new actor speak Hagrid's dialogue with a different cadence and a different accent is, quote, like turning off the subtitle.
Wow.
It instantly breaks the immersion. Your brain just rejects the information.
It forces the viewer to constantly remind themselves they are watching an adaptation rather than just getting lost in the story. The breakdown also notes visual jarring, specifically pointing out that the new iteration of Dumbledore is being described by fans as looking incredibly Gandalfy, which is dangerous territory.
Yeah.
It is. When you lose the distinct visual flair that Richard Harris or Michael Gambon brought to the role, and instead lean into generic fantasy tropes, long white beard, gray robes, you begin to blur the lines between distinct legacy properties. You lose the specific identity of Harry Potter, and it just becomes generic high fan.
And speaking of specific visual identities, we absolutely have to talk about the debate surrounding the casting of Snape.
Yeah.
Because it is dominating the discourse tracked in the breakdown.
Yes.
And I want to be very clear to you listening about what the data is actually saying here, because the internet narrative often gets distorted. We're just reporting what the breakdown analyzed. The source details the intense reaction to the casting of a Black actor in the role of Severus Snape. But what is truly fascinating is the specific nature of the critique dominating the forums.
Right, because the frustration being tracked isn't primarily demographic, it's aesthetic.
Exactly. The most prominent critiques explicitly state that the race of the actor is the absolute least of their worry. What the fandom is genuinely upset about is the cost. The new character design features dreads and what appears to be a very cheap, shiny pleather outfit. Fans are comparing this to Alan Rickman's iconic, flowing, meticulously tailored academic robe.
The outrage isn't about who is wearing the costume. The outrage is that the costume itself looks like an enormous aesthetic downgrade.
Yes, feeds right back into that Temu narrative we discussed earlier. The execution just feels...
It highlights the immense, almost unfair pressure of stepping into a role definitively shaped by a legendary performance. The audience was apparently heavily campaigning for an actor like Adam Driver to take the role.
Right, someone who naturally evokes that specific brooding, gothic energy Rickman established. By going in a completely different aesthetic direction, but doing so with a costume that reads as low budget, The studio has triggered immediate, and beyond the casting of individual characters, there is a broader, entirely unavoidable specter of controversy that the Clownfish TV breakdown directly addressed. And again, we are looking at this from a purely analytical standpoint regarding audience reception. We're not taking any sides here.
Right, strictly analytical.
The undeniable reality is that the discourse surrounding anything related to this IP is now permanently heavily muddied by the well-documented ongoing controversies surrounding the author railing.
From an industry analysis perspective, that controversy is a massive variable in the cultural reception equation. You can no longer launch a product in this universe without the marketing and the audience reaction being immediately entangled in broader culture.
It creates a highly charged, incredibly toxic environment before a single episode airs.
It does.
Which leads to a really sobering point raised in the break. Because of that incredible toxic online battlefield where certain factions actively try to boycott or cancel anything associated with the IP, there is a very genuine protective concern emerging for the new child actors.
Yeah, these are just kids.
Exactly. They are stepping into the roles of Ron, Hermione, and Harry. They are stepping into a massive cultural crossfire that they had absolutely no part in creating. The consensus among reasonable fans tracking this is a profound hope that the internet will somehow find the grace kind to these children, regardless of their opinions on the author or them.
It is a fractured fandom, and the data provided in the breakdown perfectly illustrates just how deeply divided the audience really is. If you look at the raw engagement metrics on the trailer, it is startling.
What are the numbers looking like?
On the main official corporate account, the trailer received roughly 91,000 downvotes compared to 201,000 upvotes.
Whoa, that is a massive ratio of disapproval for a flagship franchise.
It is. But what is even more fascinating is the geographical split. On the HBO Max Europe account, the engagement was nearly a dead even 50-50 split. We are talking 13,000 downvotes to 14,000 upvotes.
A 50-50 split on a Harry Potter trailer. That would have been mathematically unthinkable 20 years ago. People used to line up around city blocks at midnight just to buy the books.
I remember those lines.
Right. To see a European audience, an audience that culturally claims this British IP as their own rebel against it, to the tune of a 50% disapproval rating, is staggering.
It suggests a profound loss of goodwill. But, and this is the crucial counter-metric, despite that intense division and vocal backlash, the breakdown also notes that the trailer still garnered 6 million views in a single day.
So people are angry, people are skeptical, but people are still fundamentally watching.
They can't look away from the car crash.
But looking at all of this, the 50-50 fractured audience, the massive logistical risk of a 10-year shoot, the ballooning television budgets, the impossible task of replacing legendary actors, and a toxic online battlefield, it forces you to ask the ultimate question.
Why do it?
Yeah, why would Warner Brothers even attempt this? If the risk of completely ruining the legacy of your golden goose is this high, why greenlight the project?
To answer that, we have to pull all the way back. We have to look at the macro view, the underlying corporate strategy that dictates modern Hollywood.
And the breakdown offers cynical, but honestly, an incredibly realistic theory to explain this entire. The theory posits that this reboot is not happening for artistic. It is not happening because a visionary showrunner came into a pitch meeting with a burning, undeniable need to retell this.
It's happening because of something the breakdown calls curbside appeal.
It is a concept borrowed directly from real estate.
Exactly.
Think about the private equity mindset applied to art. When you want to flip a house on the market, you don't spend money fixing the foundation or updating the plumbing. You slap a cheap, fresh coat of paint on the exterior, plant a few cheap bushes in the front yard, and you take high-contrast photos. You manufacture curbside.
The theory here is that Warner Brothers Discovery is simply trying to prove to potential corporate buyers or trying to inflate their stock price for a merger by demonstrating that the Harry Potter IP is still active.
They are signaling to Wall Street. They are saying, look, this asset isn't dead. It is still generating new content. It is still driving millions of views, and it is still viable for future monetization.
They are flipping the IP.
Flipping the IP.
If we contextualize this within the broader landscape of the entertainment industry over the last 5 years, this strategy makes perfect, ruthless sense. We are currently looking at a massive franchise graveyard across Hollywood.
Yeah, the breakdown makes several really astute comparisons here.
You look at Disney continually struggling to reboot and spin-off Star Wars. You look at the recent announcement of an upcoming Lord of the Rings movie focused on Gollum, which nobody asked for.
Literally nobody.
And most critically for Warner Brothers, you look at the fact that their recent attempt to expand this very universe, the Fantastic Beasts spin-off movies, essentially failed critically and commercially.
They couldn't make the expanded universe.
And the ironclad rule of Hollywood IP man, if the spin-offs fail, The studio immediately retreats to the core story to guarantee revenue. If audiences won't pay to see a magizoologist in the 1920s, you go back to the boy in the cupboard under the stair. You retreat to the ultimate safety of the original brand.
You go back to the well because you know there is still some water left at the bottom, even if it's muddy. But before we get entirely buried under the heavy cynicism of corporate IP milking and Wall Street maneuvering, I do want to highlight the one single ray of hope that emerged from the Clownfish TV breakdown.
There is a ray of hope.
There is one. Yeah. It is a detail about the specific people actually making this show. The breakdown points out that the creative team spearheading this new Harry Potter reboot previously worked on HBO's adaptation of his Dark Materials.
Okay. And from an industry perspective, that is a highly relevant, potentially optimistic data. His Dark Materials was a very successful, critically respected television adaptation of Philip Pullman's beloved book series. But what makes it so relevant to this conversation is that it was a successful adaptation that followed a completely failed, widely mocked movie version, the 2007 film The Golden Compass.
Right. So from a studio executive's perspective, this specific creative team has a proven track record. They are the fix. They know how to take a broken, messy, cinematic adaptation of a beloved fantasy book and meticulously fix it for a premium television format.
They know how to structure a fantasy narrative for episodic television, which is a very specific skill set.
Yes.
However, I have to push back on how much hope that track record actually provides in this specific scenario. The context is entirely different.
How so?
As the breakdown rightfully implies, the Golden Compass movie was a massive flop. The audience wanted a redo. They were begging for someone to come in and get the story right.
So they were ready for a
Exactly. Harry Potter, conversely, was a generational defining cinematic triumph. The original movies are beloved, critically acclaimed, multi-billion-dollar success stories that are still watched religiously every holiday season.
That's true.
Fixing a failure is one thing. Trying to overwrite a beloved success is a completely different psychological battle for the audience. You aren't stepping in to fix something broken. You are actively attempting to replace something that people deeply cherish.
And people hate being told that the thing they cherish needs to be replaced.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground here. From the granular details of costume design to the macroeconomics of corporate mergers, let's bring all these threads together.
If we synthesize the core conflict we've explored through the lens of this breakdown, the situation is this. The HBO Harry Potter reboot is currently trapped in a paradox of its own making.
Right.
To justify its own existence, it has to be different enough from the iconic movie fresh. But to guarantee the financial returns the studio needs, it has to be similar enough to trigger deep, immediate nostalgia. And it is attempting to achieve this impossible balancing act while simultaneously navigating a deeply fractured and vocal fandom.
The crushing weight of modern bloated television budget.
And the heavy, immovable legacy of a 25-year-old cinematic master. It is a high-wire act in a hurricane.
That's a great one.
And to you, listening to this deep dive right now, thank you for taking this journey with us through the incredibly chaotic intersection of pop culture, fandom psychology, and industry economics. It is so valuable to look past the immediate, visceral internet.
It really is.
When you scroll past the comments just shouting slop or Temu and actually examine the mechanisms underneath, you start to see the massive grinding gears of the Hollywood machine. Understanding the why and the how behind the media we consume, understanding the financial pressures and the logistical nightmares makes being a fan so much more interesting than consuming the final product.
It absolutely does. It elevates the conversation from a simple like or dislike to a cultural critique. And looking at this entire situation, it leaves us with a critical, lingering question to ponder long after this deep dive ends.
Let's hear it.
We are watching studios mine their past because they are terrified of the financial risks of the future. But if an entire generation's defining stories, whether that is Harry Potter or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, are just going to be endlessly rebooted, repackaged, and spun into these parallel universes that always feel slightly off, what happens to the next generation? Are we inadvertently creating a culture that is entirely incapable of generating its own new nostalgia? Are we destined to be forever trapped as new tenants, endlessly wandering the halls of an old, uncanny home?
That is the thought to leave on. You drive back to the neighborhood, and the replica house is there. The lights are on in the windows, the paint is fresh. You can't shake the feeling that nobody is true until the next stack of sources awaits. Thank you for diving deep with us.